Hello. I mentioned in the introductory video a couple of weeks ago that I was going to present some more material on sociological theories, and I'm doing this for the most part because quite a few of the questions that you'll see in the quizzes and that will turn up on the two exams involve applying the perspectives of one or more of the major theory groups or theoretical perspectives to a problem. For instance, how would a feminist theorist design research to study a particular type of interaction between uh, males and females, or to look at socialization of male children versus female children? How would they design this? Or, for instance, how would a feminist theorist explain inequality compared to a conflict theorist, compared to a functionalist theorist, and so forth? So, if you really, it would behoove you to get a really good grasp of the assumptions and similarities and differences between these theory groups, so to speak. Uh, it will help when you encounter the questions on exams, particularly. I know you have more resources when you're doing the quizzes, but um, just learning a few of the fundamental beliefs and assumptions that characterize people who apply these perspectives will be very helpful. So that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be in two parts, I think. This first part, just going to back up a bit and give you some generalities. For instance, like, just what is a theory? I know you've probably used the word quite a bit, often to just mean your idea, your guess about something, that your explanation for why something has happened. In the context we're using it in this course, and in terms of sociology and sciences and so forth, it goes beyond that. A theory is kind of a consistent set of beliefs about the world or some aspect of the world that enable you to understand it, to make sense of it, that allow you to look at one particular manifestation of something, and based upon and the situation in which you're observing it, and be able to predict how it might change over time, or how it might be different in a different situation. Whether those predictions or assumptions are true or not is not really what I'm trying to get at here. It's just that it's a set of ideas that you use to explain or understand the world. Sciences tend to rely upon theories. There's a bedrock of theory that chemistry, physics, astronomy, geology, biology, sociology, psychology, economics, there are theories that they draw upon, and from these theories they will infer certain statements that will often then be tested through an experiment or something like that. These statements are called hypotheses, and basically it's sort of a logical reasoning from the assumptions of the theory, that if these parts of the theory are true, then in the world you would expect to see this smaller thing, this thing we can get a handle on, that we can observe happening in our world. Then there should be a specific relationship predicted by the theory. If we don't find that relationship, that casts some doubt on the validity of the assumptions of that theory. Basically, what I'm talking about here, you probably know as the scientific method, or at least one part of it. So, often people will treat sociology as a science. There are aspects of sociology which are very scientific, so to speak. They are dependent upon observation and summary of the observations that you've made in order to test a specific hypothesis, to adjudicate, for instance, between two rival theories or sub-theories, because we have a lot of those as well. However, sociology is not a science in the same sense as chemistry or physics is. In physics, chemistry, if you have a certain, for instance, in chemistry, you have a certain amount of sodium, and you have 10 grams of sodium, and you expose it to chlorine gas for a long period of time. You can predict within a small degree of error, the amount of salt, sodium chloride, you're going to have at the end of this process. At least you know what the limit, how much you could conceivably get if your process is 100% efficient. You calculate efficiency based upon the difference. However, in sociology, it's not so much like that. The relationships generally take the form of probabilities. There's a tendency that in this situation you might see this happening, a certain probability, more often than not, for instance. There's a lot more uncertainty, and that's partly because human beings have agency. We can act in ways that others do not expect us to act. We can act if it's not uncommon if a student, for instance, participating in a psychological experiment, they may be able to figure out what it is the researchers are going after, and you could conceivably behave in a different way and mess up their research. So that's not going to happen with sodium and chlorine gas. It's always going to happen one particular way. Another difference really is that all physicists pretty much accept the usefulness, applicability, and to a certain extent the truth of quantum mechanics and Newtonian physics within the domain in which it's applicable. So they all kind of share this same paradigm. A man named Thomas Kuhn would call it in a very influential book that I won't go into now. Paradigm, it just means model. It's spelled Paradigm. You may have heard the word. It used to be very popular in management circles years ago. It still pops up now and then. You don't hear it as often as you used to, but it had a specific use by Dr. Kuhn in explaining how science changes. So the paradigm is just something that all the people in a given discipline, a set of beliefs that they share, and this set of beliefs has an impact upon the way they're going to approach their studies of the world, their empirical research. As I mentioned, a lot of sociological research is empirical in nature. What do I mean by empirical? EMPIRICAL. That means it's observational. You're using your senses in some way to gather information about the world. Empirical observation. Not all sociologists would accept that sociology is really a science, and many sociologists don't think that's important at all. There's a certain strains in sociology among what we will call critical theory that we'll get to a little later. You may have read about it in your text already. That is somewhat anti-scientific. They're opposed to this notion derived from empiricism called positivism, the idea that the only way to obtain true knowledge about the world is using these scientific methods, empirical observation and so forth. They reject that. Some of the original critical theorists rejected it pretty strongly. Other wings of critical theory rejected it in a different manner, the postmodernists. So but for the critical theorists, the purpose of sociology, of studying the social world, is not really to come up with a set of general laws like you might have in physics, for instance, those sorts of theories, Newton's 3 laws of motion, for instance. You cannot come up with anything like that, and the point is really to obtain information that allows you to effectively work to change the world, to make the world better. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay. So, theories. Theories have assumptions. They're clusters of assumptions. A formal definition from the Oxford Dictionary of Sociology A theory is an account of the world that goes beyond what we can see and measure. It combines a set of integrated definitions and relationships that organize our concepts and understanding of the empirical world in a systematic way. Okay, that's a mouthful. You're not going to need to know that on any of the tests coming up, as far as I know. So, generally, as you know, theories are going to, scientists, including many sociologists, are going to test these theories by deriving hypotheses, statements that are going to be true if certain parts of the theory are true, deriving a hypothesis that you can test with observations of the world. For instance, if you want to test a particular theory of how power is wielded in a corporation, you're interested in looking at the changing power of labor unions, for instance, vis-a-vis management of a within an industry. You might derive the hypothesis that if it is the case that neoliberalism has resulted in a weakening of labor unions, that you can do a comparative study comparing a country that has adopted what is called neoliberalism. You don't need to worry about what that is. It's a particular way of approaching political economy. Comparing the historical changes in the power of labor unions with a country where neoliberalism has not been adopted. It's one thing one could do. Okay, you can test that using data. Often the data in sociology, quite often the data you're testing are historical data. You're trying to understand how an institution of some sort, like the family or education or the economy, economic production, has changed over time. You're trying to understand what factors affected the change and modulated the nature of that change. What is behind it? What is driving social change? For Marx, what is driving history? His answer was it's class conflict. That's not a popular answer these days. That's what he saw as the motor of history, so to speak. Okay, theories can be developed at several levels. The macro theories are about the big picture theories. There are also middle range theories that are kind of between the big picture sorts of beliefs, these assumptions, these high level things that will connect you with the world at ground level, so to speak. Often it is middle range theory which is developed and tested. It's developed from assumptions of the major theories. I forgot to mention, sociologists do not all share the same paradigm, as you probably learned during your reading. That's one big difference between a science like physics and sociology. There are disputes over aspects of the theory. They're always looking in physics for something which gives them a reason to develop some new sort of theory. They're getting kind of bored lately, so they're looking really hard for new particles that are not predicted by existing theories, but that need not concern us. There's also something called grounded theory. Now, I mentioned that you take the assumptions of a theory and derive a hypothesis and test it. That's relying upon a particular type of logic called deductive logic, reasoning from something general to something specific. In grounded theory, you try to put the assumptions, these general beliefs, out of your mind. You just make observations. You build your theory from the ground up, so to speak. That's common in education and nursing. It had a period of popularity within sociology. It's still used from time to time. It was very popular. It's still very popular in nursing research, educational research. So that one thing about theory which you may have noticed, we talk about classical social theory, and there are really three names that are important in what we call classical as opposed to modern or contemporary. So are Karl Marx, Max Weber, Emil Durkheim. They are very important. They have some things in common, and it's something which has been true of sociology as it's taught in the United States. It's very Eurocentric. Most of the ideas were derived by European males, for that matter, who are deceased, and it's been there's been a lack of diversity in the voices in sociology. That has been changing a lot since the 1970s and forward. But you will notice that there's less discussion of theories, for instance, that come from the Islamic world or from India, from China. That's definitely, don't take that to mean that there has been no social theorizing in those somewhat different cultural settings, because that is not the case. So, and sociologists are gradually incorporating some of those ideas from the past to incorporate into the classical canon, so to speak. And obviously, in this globalized world, where people from all over the world, from many different perspectives, are doing research that is available to everyone. So, I think. Okay, let me just say briefly, these three big groups, now I'm going to call them three groups. Sometimes there are different ways to slice and dice all this. I've seen 5 groups created, 4, 3, but 3 is fairly common because it sort of fits the, not really too much, 3 of the big, those 3 males I mentioned, the dead white European males, Weber, Durkheim, and Marx. Those 3 big groups are conflict theory, sometimes called critical conflict theory, functionalism, sometimes called structural functionalism, and symbolic interactionism, often called micro-interactionism. So, conflict theory and functionalism are both macro theories. Interactionism is a micro, hence the micro-interactionism. Oh, I'm going to put a couple links on the homepage of the course homepage, which will take you to a chart, which may be handy. It looks something like this, except it's in color. It breaks down some of the features of each of these 3 theory groups. For instance, which makes it easy to compare and get a grasp upon some of the beliefs. For these 3 groups, you will see their answers to what is the nature of society, what holds society together, what's their research like, what do they focus on, strengths, criticisms, and who are some of the big players, the major writings in establishing the tradition. So I'm going to go over the 3 theories in more detail. I just want you to be aware that this sociological theories, the big 3, will be linked on the homepage. It may be useful to you. Also, there will be the lecture that I use in face-to-face classes, which you can look through if you like. It's not required. Might be helpful. Can't hurt, probably. So, with that in mind, I think I will stop this, call this part 1 of my presentation of additional supplemental material. Thank you very much.